know that I'm excited about this next guest. There is so much about this book and this guy's experience and talent and hashtag balance. Like, he's the epitome of hashtag balance, is he not, Jimmy Mack?
It really is. And, given the fact of what he is a master of, I was so kind of deeply impressed with how moving the writing it was, too.
Yeah.
It's a great story, by the way, and we're so glad to have David Singer. He's the author of...
Yes, David, we read your book.
Yeah, we read your book.
Spoiler alert.
Full disclosure, we do that. We've been doing that for a long time on our platforms. From Cab Driver to Carnegie Hall, one musician's story of grit and glory. I normally give a long introduction, David, to people, but so much of what this is about you. And so we're going to kind of unpack this over the course of this whole kind of story. I'm talking about chamber music performance. I'm talking about being a member of a trio. I'm talking about working with iconic violinists. I'm talking about working with iconic pianists. I'm talking about being a member of the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra for 36 years. I could go on. I'm talking about actually having to make a living by going to Seattle while at the same time establishing a genuine bona fide celebrity career. David joins us this morning. He has a wonderful book. I'll say the title again, From Cab Driver to Carnegie Hall, One Musician's Story of Grit and Glory. Good morning to you, David Singer.
Good morning, Jimmy Mack. Good morning, Lindsay.
So happy to have you here, Dave. Where do we speak to you this morning? Where are you currently? Set the scene.
You guys were talking about waking up early. Well, I'm on the West Coast. I'm
okay.
just outside of LA, so I was up about 5:30 this morning walking my dogs. And it's another beautiful day here, but I was kind of laughing about waking up early. It's a little earlier than I usually get up, but that's okay. I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, we're happy to be a part of your morning Joe this morning. So thank you so much for joining us on this first week of our launch after making the shift from the old platform, which we don't talk about, but we're welcome to the new one, which we're happy to have you as a new friend of the show here. Yeah. And I want to dive in. This book is so inspiring, and I want to quickly tell anybody listening, David, we have a vast majority of our listenership are truck drivers, over-the-road truck drivers, and I think this book is going to be really inspirational, whether you're a musician or not. That doesn't matter. Whatever it is you're passionate about, I think this book is going to help you find ways to both live your life as far as, by necessity and also pursuing passion. So, but before I dive into that question, I want to start from the beginning, because your early passion for baseball shifted dramatically after a transformational year in Vienna. I would love for you to talk about that, because I am obsessed, David. I'm going to say that word again, obsessed with those moments in life that shift everything. It's like I'm walking to the left, I see something shiny, and all of a sudden I'm on a whole new path. And that's sort of what this trip to Vienna was for you. Can you talk about how that changed everything?
Well, it's a lot of stuff. Talking about baseball, I mean, it was always my passion. Growing up, I was invited to a summer camp with the Baltimore Orioles, and it was a pretty good pitcher. But then I was in the All-Star game, and we were kind of making our way to Williamsport and Pennsylvania, the Little League World Series, actually the Senior League. And I realized that being out in the field that if it was a tense moment in the game and I was playing a pitcher or I was in the outfield, I used to pray to God that the ball would not be hit to me. I didn't want to be there to be in, when the game was being decided or up at the plate when the bases were loaded. So I told that to my dad. He said, "This baseball is great, but it's not for you." So music was another thing that I did pretty well. But that year was crazy. From August 1st, 1961 to August 1st, 1962. None of you guys were. Well, I don't know if you were born yet. But anyway, it's a million years ago to me. But I was 12 years old, and my dad took what they call a sabbatical, a year off. He was a teacher, and at that time you could take a year off with half pay. We went to Vienna to visit relatives and spend a year in Europe. And he calls up the principal clarinetist of the Vienna Philharmonic, which was one of the great orchestras in the world. It would have been like your dad calling up Mikhail Baryshnikov or one of the great dancers or whatever your passion, Barbara Streisand. My daughter sings and she'd like lessons. I mean, it was something like that. Sandy Koufax, my boy plays he's the pitcher. But so he calls up this icon in Vienna, and because the Vienna Philharmonic weren't making very much money, Professor Yedel said, "Sure, come on over. I'll hear him play," and I did, and it changed my life. I was weeks later sitting in the orchestra as a 12-year-old, turning pages, and I saw the great opera singers and the sets and the designers and the lighting, and I just fell in love with expressing emotions through music. And so that's what I always remember as being a turning point in my life. And since then, I've met professional baseball players and all athletes too, but as a result of playing in Carnegie Hall and all over the world. But really, the book is, I mean, most musicians or athletes, when they write a book, when they write a memoir, it's all about their glory. It's all about the wins that they have. My book, I had more losses than wins, really. It's really about overcoming obstacles. It's about being in a job. I was, as I told you, I grew up playing the clarinet. I did nothing with my hands except play the clarinet. Well, I found myself in Seattle, in the Northwest, selling welding rod. Now, that's a wonderful job for a lot of people, but I was completely miscast for that. Sometimes to sell the welding rod, the welders are basically hidden from salesmen. The companies like Weyerhaeuser or even Boeing, they don't want their welders talking to salesmen as they're coming through. And so I had to I'd get up at really early in the morning before the sun came up and go to some of these big factories out in Tacoma, particularly on the waterfront. And I had to sometimes climb a fence and even run from guard dogs to get to the welders to have them try my stuff, as opposed to going to the purchasing agent. So, because you go to a purchasing agent and it's all about talk. I had to sell. It was just my daughter and me at the time. I was, single dad. And so I had to make money. I climbed the fences, ran from guard dogs, and they would try my welding rod, and then they would decide if they liked it. They'd go to the purchasing agent, and I would make a sale, and everything was great. But I went from there. I knew that that's not something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I have nothing but admiration for people who work with their hands in terms of that kind of stuff, but that wasn't me. So little by little, I read a book actually called "What Color is Your Parachute?" It was big decades ago. It was an important book because it told you, and I'm sure it's still out there. It gave you tests and games and things like that you could play, and by doing that, it showed you what areas you were most passionate about. And so I read the book, and turned out music and children were the areas that I should be focused on. I had already had a career, but there I was in Seattle trying to keep my family together. My wife was from Seattle. I was in New York before, moved to Seattle, couldn't play the clarinet in Seattle. So anyway, I read this book, I developed a program called Music Magic, and that enabled me, little by little, taking small steps, doing it and implementing it in Seattle. It enabled me to take my daughter with me and win custody, and we went back to New York City, and little by little, I was part of a group, the only group of its size, 20 people, that went from playing for nothing to winning Grammy Awards and signing a big recording contract that even today on Sirius XM radio, they're still playing our recordings and featuring me often with its Orpheus Chamber Orchestra from New York. So all kinds of great things happened. But the book, I was a victim of child abuse, and when I was very early. Part of the reason I wrote the book was not to brag about my wins. Again, I lost more than I won, but I did win enough so that I ended up having an okay life and playing all over the world and being able to now play for organizations, raise money, play for sick people in hospitals, do what I can to give back. And so it's been quite a life, and I'm still going. So Thanks for having me.
Oh, you got it, by the way. In case you guys don't know, David Singer, who you can find at singerclarinet.com, has written the wonderful book, Cab Driver to Carnegie Hall, One Musician's Story of Grit and Glory, from the streets of New York to the grand stages of the world. It's also very much a time period piece because there, as I was reading the book, Lindsay, one of the things I remembered was the great Philip Glass story about how one of the music critics in the city of New York had to call for a plumber in the 1970s. And the plumber arrived, and he walked in to go underneath the guy's sink, and the guy went, "Wait a minute, you're Philip Glass, the experimental composer." He says, "Yeah, I'm also your plumber today, so let's talk about these pipe problems you have." And
Wow.
and people forget that, David, the idea that it's that people have to make a living in order to make a world create. But the problem is often that making the living wears them down from creating that world. What I found so deeply inspiring about the story was a sense of stick to it, stick to it. You've got to do the things that you've got to do. And after a while, I know you said you have a lot of losses, but it's amazing if you look at yourself as a franchise, we can compare you to the Mets, where you get that first decade of absolutely getting plastered, and then slowly but surely, in the clarinet, you find your Tom Seaver, and you're able to kind of spin a whole world into existence. Am I making sense?
No, of course. You know, I read an article. Roger Federer, the world class, tennis champion. He gave a speech. I guess it was at Dartmouth, a commencement speech. Anyway. You'd think of Roger Federer as being, winning every match and winning every game that he played of every match. And he said, guess what percentage of games I won in my career? And nobody could guess. Everyone thought 70. I mean, he won Wimbledon, he won the French, he won, the big international tournaments, Roger Federer. It turns out he won 54% of his matches, 54% of the games that he played, 54. And so what it means is, he won a little bit more than he loved, but he lost a lot. And so when you're faced with a hardship, when you're faced with something that you need to overcome, well, you don't necessarily overcome it overnight, but that by taking small steps, keeping your eye on what you want to do, and just keep going. Often you become more successful than you ever dreamed, and that's just certainly what happened with me.
Well, the more successful than you ever dreamed is we're still walking in this world and balancing the world out. And I think, despite all of your high profile achievements, but, you also went through and this is going to be kind of like taking it one step further from what Jim was asking you, but, you endured all the financial hardship in New York, but obviously you were driving the cab out of necessity. And I love where I love, and I use that, where you recall the shame of every time you drove by Carnegie Hall, you were afraid that one of your colleagues would recognize you.
Oh, wow.
That landed for me. And, we talk a lot, we have a lot of artists and musicians and all kinds of creatives on the show. And we talk a lot about the balance of putting food on the table. And as I say, putting food in your soul. So my husband, my now husband, he wasn't at the time when we lived in LA, he stopped working in production for a minute and was just acting for a while. And I was like, well, why do you have to stop working to pursue that passion? And he's like, well, if I'm going to do it, I have to be all in. And that always struck me because I've never been all in. I've always I've pursued the creative and then also been like, but yeah, what else are you doing? And that comes from my family. I know they're listening, love my parents, but it was like before people understood that, creativity and all these different outlets to expose it. So what I want to ask you is your take on what is the balance of having a healthy and hopefully most prioritized focus on your passion while not alienating your, quote unquote responsibilities, relationships, and means for necessities, if that makes sense.
I had to keep it very separate to others. One day I played for the President of the United States. I played for two presidents, actually. And
Carter and Clinton, right? It's Carter and Clinton.
Carter and Clinton, right. Mm-hmm. Carter was the first one, around 1980. And I remember meeting him, and I remember his wife. I remember shaking hands with her. She had still the softest hands I ever felt. Anyway.
Shout out.
I had to leave early after our performance. Why? Because I had to get back to New York City to drive my cab. The same day I played for the president, I drove a cab in New York, and I picked people up, and I'm looking around, and I said, guess what I did today? And, they suddenly, my passengers got very nervous. I thought, oh, this guy, what's he going to do? Take us to the river and shoot us?
This guy's crazy.
Yeah. So you really keep it separate. One of the reasons I wrote the book was to let people know why, on the road, we would, Orpheus, we worked actually for the State Department sometimes. They would send us to places like India and all over the world, to countries where we're trying to make friends. But anyway, nobody wanted to stay in the room next to mine or even down the hall because I was always practicing, always trying to catch up with the rest of them because they were all doing their thing all the time. I was doing other things. I was, driving the cab and all that kind of stuff. So I wasn't practicing. So I had to catch up. So I had to practice while we were on the road, and everybody was, their hotel, they wanted to sleep. So, I mean, you keep it separate. You keep your mind on, you keep your mind on your goals, and that's what your business is, and you do what you do. And right now, and through my career, I was always so grateful. I get to open my clarinet, I get to put it together and make music, and I get paid for it. Wow, because I remember not getting paid for it. And so, I'm just so grateful for these little things, and now I can go by a restaurant, and instead of having to just continue to walk by and ignore it, I can go in and I can sit in the restaurant. I can, my wife and I can travel, and it wasn't always like that, and so I can appreciate it so much more now because
David,
I went without.
I love this so much. The visual of you, playing for the president and going back in the cab and trying to convince the people in your cab that what you had just done. It's such an amazing image. And it reminds me, I have to tell you really quick, because it's funny. I sang at Arlington Cemetery years ago, and it was the first time I sang there, and I'm in the amphitheater, and it's, all these people there. It's this amazing moment, and I had this white flowy gown on, and it was a very magical moment. And then I walked off stage, and our friend Debbie Sparks, who was there, who was kind of putting the event on, she threw me the car keys and was like, "Hey, I need your help. Can you go drive that van and take some of our Wreath Lane volunteers back to their cars?" And I was like, "Sure." Wow. Literally walking off stage. So I'm in an Avis rental car passenger van in my white gown and high heels. Telling the people in the back, I just sang, and they're like, "Sure, lady, you're crazy." But but what I think it did, and I think to your point, is that it's not that it took away from that amazing experience of you performing for a president. It keeps you grounded. It keep going back and forth, and it's like this breathing, expansive thing to keep growing and then coming back to real life experiences that you can continue to create from. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. And I'm finding that now, and before, it's what I'm doing for others. Actually, I went into music because of the passion, the expression of these great musicians in Vienna, and how the audience was responding, and so. With Orpheus, we started, like I say, playing for free, and then we got our chance to play in Carnegie Hall, and as a result, people were standing ovation, and we had got agents and recording contracts as a result of that. But people were getting a lot of pleasure from us. One particular story that I played a special concert in New York with someone whose name was Yehudi Menuhin. People may not have heard of him. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth. He was considered, if you Google,
he's
Yehudi,
the violinist, right, from the book.
Menuhin,
He's the violinist from the book.
One of the great violinists of the 20th century. Anyway, my mother at the time was very depressed. She was a violinist, but then she didn't like to practice, and things didn't work out for her, and she kind of gave up. And she was a housewife, and that was, it's great for some, but she wanted more. But anyway, she was very depressed, and I told Menuhin that when we were rehearsing, it was just Menuhin, me, and his pianist in a full packed house in Carnegie Hall, and I told him my mom was going to be coming to the concert all the way from Los Angeles, that he was her idol. And he said, "Listen, just bring her to me after the concert, and I'll talk with her." And he was just such a gentleman. I mean, an icon, and somebody who was always looking out to how he could make a difference in other people's lives. So after the concert, big success. Long lines of people backstage waiting to talk with Menuhin. My mom, I bring her in. She's very shy. She never wore makeup. Her face was like the Grand Canyon. I mean, it was like the crevices in her. I mean, she had a very low self-esteem. But I brought her there. This is New York, very high fashion. Bring her to the front of the line. People were thinking, "Who's this bag lady?" It's my mother. And so I brought her to him, and he saw her, and they went off. He took her into a side room. They sat down together, and I didn't see him for like 7 minutes. And people were thinking, "What's going on?" Or they're all waiting to talk with Menuhin. He brings her back, and she has this light on her. Her face was like it had come alive. She had I don't know. It was just like she had seen God or something. She came to me and she said, "David, that was the highlight of my life. I can't believe that you did that for me." So. He thrilled people, and he also had the wherewithal to know how important it was to touch, this person, my mother, as it turned out, and made a difference in her life. He changed. She came out of her depression for a long time. So anyway, it was just an amazing experience, and so. That's some of the things you do through music. You can really make a difference. But anyway,
David, really quickly, David,
that's all.
David, really quickly, David, really quickly. I just want to let people know Singer Clarinet is where they can go. For those of you who are just joining us, cab driver to Carnegie Hall, one musician story of grit and glory from the streets of New York to the grand stages of the world. That is a pretty darn good subtitle about the kind of whirlwind this thing is, and Lindsay's kind of asked this question in a different way. We talk about the moment of realizing where you want to go in life. I always like the moment of the tipping point where we finally get to the moment where we're no longer having to race back to the cab. We're no longer having to jump the fence with the barking dog. Given how fast and furious your life was, can you tell our listeners the moment when you went, "Oh my God, wait, I'm making a living at this and only this. How did this happen? Who let all these people into my room?" Did you ever become aware of it cognizantly, or did it just kind of blend in with the way your life was going?
What made a big difference in my life and my career was when I was appointed a professor of music at the State University of New Jersey, Montclair State University, and just in a practical sense, they wanted me to be on their faculty. I didn't have a bachelor's degree, but because of who I was playing with and the recordings that we were making and all of the times where I was playing in Carnegie Hall, and they appointed me. So anyway, in a practical sense, I was able to make a living not doing anything but teaching at the university and playing in New York and all over the world, and not have to run back and drive my cab anymore. That was probably the time that made the biggest difference in terms of being able to make a living. And also when we started making recordings and we got more and more concerts and just things just kind of skyrocketed after that. But it took years. It took a lot of years before that was to happen,
One more quick thing, Lindsay. I wanted to tell both of you guys, and I think you, as a baseball fan, will get a massive kick out of this. Connie Mack is the all-time leader in wins for Major League Baseball with 3,731 wins. Lindsay, you know how many losses he has?
How many?
3,948. Unbelievable. There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, you win, you lose, and then it rains sometime.
But you keep going.
You keep going. You keep going.
Yeah.
David, we're out of time. We can't keep going anymore. We wanted to say thank you. Is the book on audiobook yet? That's important for our listeners.
It's not on audio. I'm thinking about putting it on audio, but you can certainly, Amazon and all the usual places So thanks so much for having me.
Oh my God, what a remarkable book. Lindsay, I knew this was your bag.
It's
knew.
right in my bag. And so, David, my word, I make everybody around here pick a word for each year. And my word for this year was grit. So immediately it was like, I like this guy. He's a musician. He also keeps it real and he's got grit. So thank you for being here. Everybody listening will be encouraged and inspired by this book.
Thanks very, very, very much. Thank you.
Guys, please head over to all the socials for this book, and it's a wonderful book. Thank you so much for making the time, David, this day on #RGR Road Gang Radio here on YouTube, iHeartRadio, Facebook, and all the places you get what you need to get.